The Junkers Ju-87 Stuka became one of the most recognizable aircraft of the Second World War. Its inverted gull wings and fixed landing gear made it instantly identifiable, and its screaming siren struck terror into those on the ground below. By 1945, however, the war had ended, and thousands of these dive bombers sat silent across Europe. What happened to them in the years that followed is a story of destruction, repurposing, and unexpected second careers. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the Allied forces found Stuka aircraft scattered across occupied territories. Many had been abandoned at airfields throughout Germany, Austria, and other parts of Central Europe. The Luftwaffe had lost air superiority years earlier, and the Stuka, designed for unopposed dive bombing, had become increasingly vulnerable to enemy fighters. By war's end, production had already ceased, and many units had been withdrawn from frontline service. The immediate fate of most Stukas was destruction. Allied policy called for the systematic dismantling of Germany's military capacity, and this included its aircraft. Thousands of German planes were gathered at collection points and scrapped. The metal was often melted down or simply left to rust in massive graveyards. Photographs from 1945 and 1946 show rows of Stukas, their wings removed, awaiting the cutting torch. For the Allies, these aircraft represented a threat that needed to be eliminated permanently. Not all Stukas met this fate immediately. Some fell into Soviet hands as the Red Army advanced westward. The Soviets had captured earlier versions during the war and studied them closely, but by 1945 they had little interest in operating obsolete German dive bombers. A few were briefly evaluated and tested, then most were scrapped. Soviet priorities lay elsewhere, focused on jet technology and more advanced designs captured from German research facilities. Britain and the United States also took Stukas for evaluation purposes. Several aircraft were shipped to testing facilities in England and America, where engineers examined their construction and design features. The distinctive Jericho trompete siren, the automatic dive brakes, and the robust undercarriage all received attention. But these were studies of historical interest rather than operational necessity. Allied forces had their own superior dive bombers and no need for German designs. In occupied Germany itself, some Stukas found temporary use in unexpected roles. A handful were employed by Allied forces for training purposes, teaching personnel to identify enemy aircraft types. Others were used in film productions or demonstrations. These were rare exceptions. The vast majority simply ceased to exist, reduced to scrap metal as part of the broader demilitarization effort that transformed post-war Germany. Several nations outside the major powers showed interest in acquiring Stukas after the war. Some Eastern European countries under Soviet influence briefly considered using captured German aircraft to rebuild their air forces. Czechoslovakia, which had produced components for German aircraft during the war, had access to various airframes. However, the Stuka's obsolescence and the availability of more modern Soviet equipment made it an unattractive option. Bulgaria operated a unique case. The Bulgarian Air Force had received Stukas from Germany during the war when Bulgaria was aligned with the Axis. After switching sides in 1944, Bulgaria retained some of these aircraft into the immediate post-war period. They were used primarily for training rather than combat operations, and all were retired by the late 1940s as Bulgaria transitioned to Soviet-supplied equipment. Italy presented another interesting scenario. The Italian Air Force had received Ju-87s during the war and operated them alongside their own aircraft. After Italy's surrender in 1943, and the subsequent co-belligerence with the Allies, some Italian Stukas remained in limited service. These aircraft were gradually phased out as American equipment became available through military aid programs. By 1947, Italian Stukas had been completely retired from service. Romania had been a significant operator of the Stuka during the war, using them extensively on the Eastern Front. After Romania switched sides in August 1944, joining the Allies against Germany, the Romanian Air Force continued operating its Stukas briefly. These aircraft participated in operations against German and Hungarian forces in the final months of the war. Post-war, Romania quickly retired its German equipment in favor of Soviet aircraft, and the Stukas were scrapped by 1946. Hungary also operated Stukas during the war, receiving them from Germany as part of military assistance. The Hungarian Air Force used these aircraft until the country's surrender in 1945. Like other former Axis nations in Eastern Europe, Hungary came under Soviet influence and adopted Soviet military equipment. The Hungarian Stukas were dismantled, with no significant number surviving beyond 1946. The complete elimination of operational Stukas happened remarkably quickly. By 1950, virtually no Ju-87s remained in military service anywhere in the world. The aircraft had been designed for a specific tactical role that belonged to an earlier phase of air warfare. The rapid advancement of fighter aircraft speeds and capabilities during the war had rendered the slow, vulnerable Stuka obsolete before Germany's defeat. Very few Stukas survived into the modern era as museum pieces. The wholesale destruction of German military equipment meant that almost no complete examples remained. Over the decades, aviation historians and museums searched for surviving airframes. The Deutsches Technikmuseum in Berlin eventually acquired parts and fragments. The Royal Air Force Museum in London obtained components. The Smithsonian in Washington received pieces for study and display. Only one complete Ju-87 Stuka is known to exist today. This aircraft, a D-5 variant, was recovered from the waters off the coast of Croatia in the 1990s. It had been shot down in 1943 and remained submerged for nearly 5 decades. After recovery, the aircraft underwent partial restoration and is now displayed at the Luftwaffe Museum in Gottow, Germany. Its preservation provides a rare physical connection to the aircraft that once filled the skies over Europe. The lack of surviving Stukas stands in contrast to other German aircraft from the war. Several Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters and other types survived in various countries, some remaining operational for years after the war. The Stuka's specific vulnerability and obsolescence meant that no one saw value in preserving them. They had served their purpose and were no longer needed. The Stuka's legacy lived on primarily through film, photography, and historical memory. Newsreel footage from the war showed the distinctive silhouette diving toward targets. Photographs captured the aircraft in action across multiple fronts. These images became part of the visual vocabulary of the Second World War, ensuring that the Stuka remained recognizable decades after the last one was scrapped. In the immediate post-war years, the Stuka represented everything the Allies sought to prevent from rising again. German military aviation had been completely dismantled under occupation authority regulations. When West Germany and East Germany eventually formed separate air forces in the 1950s, they did so with Allied-supplied equipment and under strict limitations. There was no revival of pre-war German designs. The destruction of the Stuka fleet reflected broader Allied policy toward German military equipment. The goal was not merely to win the war, but to ensure Germany could not wage war again. Every tank, every aircraft, every weapon system was either destroyed, captured for study, or repurposed in some way that removed it from potential German control. This systematic elimination was thorough and largely successful. By the 1960s and 1970s, as interest in military aviation history grew, the scarcity of surviving Stukas became apparent. Aviation museums around the world sought examples of historically significant aircraft, but the Stuka had been too thoroughly eliminated. Collectors and historians had to rely on fragments, components, and detailed documentation rather than complete airframes. This scarcity has made the single surviving example all the more valuable to historical understanding. The Stuka that rests in the museum today serves as a reminder of technological development, strategic doctrine, and the rapid pace of change during wartime. It represents a specific moment in military aviation when dive bombing seemed an effective tactical approach. That moment passed quickly, rendered obsolete by improvements in fighter performance and air defense systems. The aircraft itself became a relic before the war had even ended. What happened to the German Stuka dive bombers after the Second World War was straightforward and absolute. They were destroyed, dismantled, and erased from operational existence within just a few years of Germany's surrender. Unlike some weapons systems that found new life in other conflicts or nations, the Stuka simply disappeared, leaving behind only memories, photographs, and one single restored example pulled from the sea decades later. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments which other World War II aircraft you'd like to see next.